Well, all I know is this. In a humanitarian rescue effort, the people we're rescuing don't actually want to be rescued. No. In fact, no one really knows who they're fighting. And what I can gather here in Syria is that Assad is evil, potentially worse than Hitler. Especially because when you don't learn lessons from the past, like Adolf Hitler, lesson. So, it really takes somebody out of their mind, and quite frankly, an awful human being. And when these Al-Qaeda roots come in and make friends with these Syrian rebels or the Syrian Free Army, which is basically the local police, and all these PTSD Marines and people like that are now cops. Okay? And that's not okay. If you have an issue, go get a tissue. We need, obviously, we need Veterans Affairs reform. We need all the veterans hospitals to be reformed. They are awful, no doubt about it. But in Syria, it's kind of the same thing. So you have these militaristic-minded police that obviously can't differentiate one of these rebels, a civilian, or, maybe an affluent, young professional. And that's really the tragedy here. And I recommend Mr. President and Mr. Prime Minister, and even Mr. Prime Minister Trudeau of the great state of Canada, because what I've witnessed today is Al-Qaeda not even hiding their ties to Assad, and that's outrageous. And if they're going to acknowledge that, it's time to step in. The missiles we fired back in March were a start, but there's been nothing done since then. And what I've heard from local Syrians is that there's still an effort, even though they say the civil war is pretty much over, that they're going after what they call loose change, which sounds to me like a group of people that maybe they genocided and didn't kill them all. So now they're going after that. And, as a humanitarian and as an ambassador to Israel, someone that's going to both Canada and Israel on my way to Israel in the next week, I must say, I can't wait to really get the attention out there and end this havoc, because it's affecting people that are would normally never be affected, and that's really the tragedy here. For example, you have these people called the Druze, and yes, maybe it's their fault for not differentiating themselves as a established people in parts of Syria. But these are non-conflictual people. They just want to do what they do, and they get by, and they're very happy doing it. And I feel really bad for a lot of these Druze, because they're kind of being affected by a lot of these leaks coming from people that are affected, who, again, probably shouldn't be affected by this violence, because you have these, very intellectual ex-Marines that are on this free Syrian army, and then the rebels, who are not much better, because, quite frankly, they're uneducated, and a lot of them didn't even graduate high school when they decided to become a rebel. It's basically like in America, if you bought your son Call of Duty when he was 7 years old and expected him to not want to join the military afterwards, or expected him that everything's going to be okay and he's not going to have any militant aggression later on in life. It's basically like if you expected that, you're overly optimistic and quite frankly a dumbass. And that's what's going on in Syria, is because you have these that's who the rebels are. I mean, that's really who they are. They're people that were trained on sort of a Call of Duty program growing up, and so they're tactical thinkers. And people say you have groups of people like I think they're called Armenians, and I think President Obama even admitted it. He thought that Greek people were tactical in nature. Like that was their basis for being here, was tactics. They spoke tactically, but they weren't problem solvers. Now, I don't know this to be true, but maybe I've witnessed some of it to be true, but I don't think you can write off a whole group of people as being like that, especially when they're intertwined and they marry into lots of other cultures. That just doesn't make any sense. I mean, what if I was a little Greek, right? Does that mean I'm tactical and I'm not a problem solver? Absolutely not. So, that's atrocious. And his legacy, by the way, President Obama, for not doing anything about Assad, it's only getting worse. So, the state of Illinois, the city of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel, they can do whatever the hell they want to try to shut people like me up. But it's not going to work out for you, okay? So you might just want to stop, okay? Cease fire now, or I urge President Trump and Israeli PM Netanyahu and Canadian PM Trudeau to put together a coalition to dismantle and get these legacy-minded morons. That's pretty much all they're worried about at this point. Obama's legacy, which was great because he empowered lots of people of color that they could be president one day. Okay, maybe we should, if we're going to talk about that, maybe we should talk about how lesbians are now in the military, and we should elect a lesbian as admiral or attorney general. That's the same kind of mindset. So the best candidate should always be elected. And that's the end of the story. The best candidate should always be elected. And if there's one thing that America is now learning, it's that the best candidate should always be elected. And President Trump is not a bad president. You're brainwashed. You've got all this leftist media propaganda being thrown at you because, again, the legacy protectors of the great President Obama. So, Assad aside, there's some real issues in Syria. And if we can't figure it out, there will be hell to pay. I urge President Trump and the Congress to do something probably before we pass this GOP tax reform, which I think is good. But we have a geopolitical crisis that is now affecting people that are our scholars, our young leaders, and people that should never be affected. Mark my words. If you're trying to protect a legacy, and you know it's a terrible legacy to protect, stop your fire, simmer down, and be a good human. That's all I got. God bless.